listeners of the Mad Scientist podcast, I'm your host, Chris Cogswell, here with my co-host, Marie Mayhew, here this week with a special interview with Dr. Sarah McAnulty, who is a squid biologist, science communicator, the executive director of Skype a Scientist, which is a really cool program we're going to talk about a little bit here, and also an assistant research professor at the University of Connecticut Department of Molecular and Cell Biology. Sarah, how are you doing today?
Doing awesome. Thanks for having me.
No problem. We are so excited. So
excited.
We wanted to start off by just kind of, I guess, giving, just talking about our love of squid. That's really how this all came about, that we wanted to have you on the show. So, when Marie and I first started this show, so initially I did the show on my own, and it was like, it was fun to do and everything else, but it was like, I wrote a script and I talked about stuff and it was kind of boring. And I asked Marie to come on and she was like, yeah, I'll come on the show if we do an episode about giant squids.
And now 3 years later, no.
Yeah.
We actually did one. We did one. It was like,
we did one.
Yeah. Pretty unscientific.
Yeah, it was kind of fun.
Yeah.
But then we saw you on Twitter, and you are an actual expert on squid biology. So why don't you tell listeners a little bit about, I guess, how you got started in that field and what you do now, or kind of what about squid biology was so interesting to you? What did you do research on?
Yeah, sure. So I first got interested in squid when I was a little kid, actually. I know it's kind of weird to have a little girl that loves squid, but I took a video out of the library when I was a kid, and it introduced cuttlefish. And so cuttlefish are a type of cephalopod that kind of look like a rugby ball with a bed skirt around the outside and then a little squid face up at the front. And so they are extremely good at changing color. And some of them do this thing called passing cloud, which is basically like they're changing color to almost look like a hypnotist's wheel. So they have this black banding sort of that moves along their body and is incredibly confusing to look at and really cool looking. And so I saw that as a kid, and I had previously been like super into dinosaurs. And then I saw cuttlefish, and that was pretty much the end of it because it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And so from there, I was pretty much hell-bent on studying cephalopods as an adult. And so I worked with cuttlefish in undergrad at the Marine Biological Lab in Woods Hole, the MBL. And then I got my PhD working with bobtail squid. And so bobtail squid aren't like the squid that you might eat in like calamari. They're not really torpedo shaped. They don't look like the giant squid. They look like a little dumpling with a face. So they're like about the size of a lime, maybe a little smaller, maybe like a key lime if you're familiar with those tiny limes. And they're like rainbow colored, but they're nocturnal. So you really wouldn't see their color most of the time because they're always in the dark. But what's really, really cool about bobtail squid is that they have this beneficial relationship with bioluminescent bacteria. And they keep that bioluminescent bacteria in this specialized little organ called a light organ. And the light organ is like the coolest evolutionary thing that's ever happened, in my opinion. It kind of looks like a black and silver butterfly, like inside of the squid. And so it has like two little pouches on either side that are full of these like crypt spaces. And so within those pouches, they keep bioluminescent bacteria. And then as the squid is up swimming at night, it's able to use the light from the bacteria and match the moonlight that comes down from above and kind of use the bacteria like a little flashlight to match that light and then blend in with the moonlight coming down, basically camouflaging themselves from predators swimming below. And so like that in and of itself is so cool. But the reason that so many scientists are studying this squid is because they're basically like a simple model for understanding how bacteria and animals talk to each other. So you might think about bacteria that are important for our lives. We know that bacteria live all over our skin. They live in our gut, and they keep us healthy, and we pretty much need them to be a healthy human digest things properly, have a normal immune system. They're really, really important. But if we wanted to study how animals and bacteria talk to each other in, say, like a mouse or a rabbit, it's pretty hard to do because a mouse or a rabbit would have like 100 to 1,000 species of bacteria living in their gut. But the squid just has one species of bacteria living in that organ. So instead of having to listen to like 100 different conversations happening all at the same time at a crowded bar, you're listening to just two people talking to each other in a quiet room. And so that's why the squid, aside from being just like inherently cool, is really, really helpful for scientists studying bacteria, animals, and how they interact with each other.
Wow, that's...
Oh my God, I want a light organ.
Don't we all? Yeah, it's so cool.
Oh, I want a light organ.
So in terms of that, like butterfly I was talking about, the black and the silver butterfly, the black is actually the ink sac of the squid. And so we think that the squid is basically using its ink sac as kind of like a shutter. And then the silver, which is kind of toward like the tips of the butterfly's wing, that's actually reflective tissue. It looks like a little mirror. And so using like muscular contraction and a lens that's inside of the light organ, it's able to control like where the light goes and how much comes out. And it's just like,
God, that's the coolest thing ever.
Totally amazing. Yeah.
That's, it's funny. So when I did, so first off, yeah, definitely want a light organ. I am very obvious in the moonlight, which has always been a problem for me in Predators. When I was in school, I did philosophy as a second major, as an undergrad. And this reminds me of a really interesting case in philosophy of science about, it's called like the fly and the fly and the frog kind of problem, right? Or it's described that way a lot of the time. And it points to this idea about like the philosophy of mind and the philosophy of cognition, of like animal cognition versus human cognition. And so this idea is, in humans, we have thoughts like, I will catch that to make food because I'm hungry or whatever. But in animals, they have these things that are just kind of like what or if then thoughts. So in other words, like if a fly passes in front of me or if a black dot passes in front of me, I will shoot my tongue out to catch it, right? If you're a frog. But it doesn't differentiate between like the fly as a fly and a black dot on a screen. So if you put a frog in front of a black dot on a screen as it's moving around, it'll still try to catch that black dot. It never seems to kind of differentiate or learn that they're different in kind because it's just like sensory information. In the case of cuttlefish, though, like the famous example, I guess, from philosophy is, those experiments where you put a cuttlefish or trying to figure out how a cuttlefish mimics its colors, right, to its surroundings. So, you put it on top of a black and white checkerboard pattern and it'll do its best to do that. The sense of like, is it, how are they thinking? How are they picking up that information? Is it their eyes? Is it their skin? Is it some mixture of the thing? It's so fascinating. Just their brains are crazy. And oh my God, it's just like, how do you pick it apart even at the beginning? I mean, squid are awesome. Cuttlefish are awesome.
It's true. I mean, studying cephalopods is super fun, but also incredibly challenging because they diverged from us so long ago that a lot of the assumptions that we may make about how a vertebrate would operate, because those are the animals that we know the most about, are just totally wrong. And so sometimes they just surprise us left and right. Like the way their brains are structured and like the dispersion of the neurons across the body. Like you have a group of neurons in octopus legs, like ganglion, which are like mini brains basically. And then one central brain. It's just like, there's just a lot going on and it is super, super cool.
To me, it's like, I think the fact that they're so different than humans and we don't know how to read them or how to react to them. Like, again, something that's a mammal, it has, you can look at it and you can start to sort of identify or even anthropomorphize it, right? Like you can see, oh, it's a kitten. It's, it's happy, it's sleepy, whatever. And so it's sort of, you have some attachment to that, but there's something so alien about a squid. right? It's like, especially when you get it on the big scale, I feel like when you start looking at like the giant squid or the colossus or something that is just, it's, to me, it's like, it's a real life monster. You know, it exists. Yeah. And it's, to me, that is so phenomenal. And it's so different. It is so different than anything else that's out there, that's existing out there. And to me, I think that kind of describes some of the fascination, or at least some of the fascination I have with it. But some of the, like, when you get into the appropriation of it with Lovecraft and horror and sort of this otherness and the alienness of it, I think that's just, there's nothing else out there that is that different from us that we know about.
Like, you're right. Yeah. I think studying invertebrates in general is really fun for that reason, because at least with a cephalopod, we can see its eyes, we can make eye contact with it, we can relate to it in some way. But I kind of think of cephalopods as like the gateway drug for invertebrates, because once you connect with a cephalopod, like,
it's all downhill. Nothing makes sense.
Time ago. Yeah, no, exactly. Like, you're like, okay, but you have a face. Like, I get what you're doing. I see that you're hunting. I see that you're like, doing your thing. But then you're like, okay, but like, what's a snail up to? Like, what's a scallop up to? Like, what are, I don't know, clams doing? Like, there's things that don't have as obvious faces are like the next things that you might think about.
Yeah.
And then you kind of need to remind yourself not to underestimate all of these other invertebrates that we're surrounded by.
Yeah.
What's the thing? What's the thing from Harry Potter? Like, doesn't Ron say his dad told him never trust a thing if you can't see where it keeps its brain?
Yeah.
Pretty much. I mean, it's like, but they're also like, from everything that I've, I got into a whole book of like, a whole spree of just buying all of the books I could find on this stuff a while back, and just like the amount of intelligence that they display, or just like you were saying, just like watching a video of something changing color, or an octopus escaping from a jar, or just anything. And you're like, it clearly has, or you can start to feel like it clearly has some sort of superior intelligence to be able to problem solve, which is just so insane to me. Like the most recent video I saw with the, and somebody posted it on Twitter too, about the giant squid in northern North America, right? Where it's tracks alongside the vessel, or the submarine that's trying to film it. And you can see it reach out and try and identify, like, hi, are you food? And then you can see it, and it's all of a sudden, it's like, whew, and it's gone. And I'm just like, that's so amazing. It's so graceful and like stealth, and it's ginormous. And it's like, that's terrifying too. So I'm just gushing. Yeah. I love that.
I think it's just really fun to like look into the eyes and connect with something that's so different from you, because like, what is more different from us than a cephalopod that you can still like make eye contact with and know that it's thinking about you when you're thinking about it?
That's so
you know
crazy.
What I mean? Like a fly, like, what is a fly thinking about? I don't know.
Very
are
suspicious.
They thinking about me, or are they just like in La La Land in there? It's hard to connect with, right? But cephalopods, so different, but there's still some kind of emotional connection there that you can make.
So for listeners, I guess, so first off, I guess I'm going to ask you some very simple questions, I guess, about kind of basic squid cephalopod stuff, just because I think, I know listeners really like this topic. They really I think people just want to learn more about animals generally if they can, you know what I mean? But it's hard to get, I don't know, it's hard to find like engaging content on this kind of stuff, I think sometimes, which is why I think the stuff that you do is so important and so cool. But so first off, I guess, let's just start with really basic stuff. So what is an invertebrate?
An invertebrate is an animal that doesn't have a backbone, basically. So all of your mollusks, insects, arachnids, and many, many more, echinoderm, like all sorts of stuff, starfish, anything that's doesn't have a backbone.
Got it. Okay. And so what is the kind of, I guess, from an evolutionary standpoint, how long ago do we think that divergence happened? I mean, I know it's hard to like pinpoint, and especially with.
Oh, geez. I don't know this off the top of my head. I know that the first cephalopod arose 500 million years ago. And to give you some context, I think the oldest shark was something around the ballpark of 425, but let me fact check that. And trees were also more recent than cephalopods. So cephalopods have been on Earth for longer than trees.
Yeah, so they've just been
suck it,
they've
trees.
just been
sorry.
they've just been comically successful in terms of their adaptations and being able to survive that long. I mean, that is crazy to think about.
They've survived 5 mass extinctions.
Wow, that's nuts.
So cool.
Pretty impressive.
Oh my God, or caused
impressive.
5.
You know,
No?
I look at my week. I just look at my week that I've got planned coming up, and I'm like, I don't think I survived this. Like, forget about a mass extinction.
Oh, please, we're gonna cause our next mass extinction.
I know.
It's not going great.
The squids are like, slow the roll.
Okay, what is the difference between a squid and an octopus?
Okay, so there's a lot of evolutionary time between those two animals, but basically, it's complicated because there's so many different ways to be a squid.
Okay.
That, there are many, many different types of squid. But broadly speaking, okay, we've got octopuses, and they have 8 arms.
Okay.
And that's it. And then we've got squid, which almost every single time have 8 arms and 2 tentacles. There's, I think, one weirdo that lives in the deep sea that loses its tentacles in adulthood, but we don't need to get into the nitty gritty. Your arms are covered in suckers all the way down, and then tentacles are super stretchy and then have clubs at the end that have suction cups, and they often have like little circular rings of teeth that allow the squid to grab onto whatever it's attacking. Squid have a couple different groups. You've got the toothoid squid, and those are the kinds that like you'd find in your calamari, basically. You've got the myopsid squid, which, you know what? This is TMI, but there are, let me see how else I can explain. Okay, basically you've got squid that look like torpedoes, and then you have squid that look like the dumpling type of squid.
Okay.
And those are called, generally speaking, the bobtail squid. Now, technically, bobtail squid aren't squid. They're their own thing. And then there's the cuttlefish, which are also their own thing. But cuttlefish, bobtails, and squid all fall into the cephalopods with 10 appendages category, which are very different from octopuses. Now, like, internally, there are differences between octopuses and squid, but not all squid or cuttlefish have the organs that octopuses don't have. So it's quite complicated. Like, we tend to oversimplify cephalopod kind of family trees, but the further in you go, the more complicated it gets.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, it's so cool. All of that is just so, man, Marie, we did an episode on these things. We had knew nothing.
We didn't do anything. Basically, it was just Chris and I telling our favorite squid story again and again, watching some YouTube videos that no one else could see. And we tried to describe them, I think, and just saying how cool it was.
Yeah, it was very successful.
They are really cool behaviorally. Like, the more we're learning about genetics, because we're starting to really rack up a bunch of cephalopod genomes, the more we're realizing, like, oh boy, this is complicated. Like, their genomes are complicated, their evolutionary history is complicated, but that just gives us more to play with.
Right, more questions to answer as the time goes on. Would you go ahead, Marie?
How do they hunt? Because I know,
so it's a mixed bag, basically. Like, it depends on the species, but on the whole, mostly okay, let's talk about like the kinds of squid that you would have like up swimming in the water column. A bunch of animals, like from plankton on up, they go through this day-night cycle where during the daytime they're pretty deep, and then at night a bunch of the plankton start to swim up toward the top of the ocean, and the squid will follow that cycle as well. And then pretty much like once they see something that they want to eat, they angle their body toward that prey item. So they might just be like bebopping around, but then you'll see them like pivot and like focus in on the fish, the crab, whatever. And then they put their arms and tentacles into like a little funnel, and then they start to like scoot their tentacles out toward like the point of their arm cone, and then shoot their tentacles out, grab the prey from either side with each tentacle, and then bring it to their mouth. And this is when things go from weird to weirder, because they have a beak. But within that beak, they have a tongue that's called a radula. It's not really a tongue, it's a radula, but imagine a tongue if you don't know what a radula is. And the radula is covered in little teeth, basically. So it's like, it's a little
so cool and spooky.
They basically like rasp, like lick their food into little bits, because like the chewing happens with the tongue teeth. And then when they swallow, their food is going through their brain, because their brains are donut shaped. So their esophagus is going through the donut hole. And so it's really, really important that they don't swallow a chunk of food that's too big, because I imagine it's like brain freeze, but worse.
It's like it's like an aneurysm.
Yeah, like really bad news. And so, I mean, you can squish a lot of things in an octopus, for example. Squid are generally not as squishy because they have more rigid body structures. But like just be glad that we don't get eaten by squid, because a lot of animals that get attacked by squid get basically eaten alive until they die. Seems terrible. Wouldn't recommend it at all. But some some prey items, the squid will have like a paralysis toxin like in their salivary glands that does them in pretty quick.
Oh my God. So I've read of incidences of them hunting in packs.
Yeah. So that would be probably the Humboldt squid.
Yeah.
Humboldt squid are like very large. They're like almost the size of a human. Not as thick, but as tall. So their main mantle, so that's like their body from their like tip of their fin to right behind their eyes, can be like about the length of your torso. And then, but again, skinnier. And then the tentacles can go longer than that. And so they do hang out in big groups. And we think that they communicate with each other by flashing white and red. And when you like look at a group of Humboldt squid flashing like that, it is like alien invasion style. Like it is the spookiest thing I've ever seen. And I'm very glad that I've never been swimming with Humboldt squid, because while there are no recorded deaths of humans by Humboldt squid, I'm still just like not trying to deal with that.
Yeah.
Like,
no,
they're pretty aggressive on the whole. And so, they swim in packs. They will eat each other. They'll eat pretty much whatever.
What's really interesting actually is, so our show, we deal with kind of, teaching and talking about science by, or trying to teach people to think critically and rationally and scientifically by discussing like fun topics and like non-science stuff sometimes. And, frankly, pseudoscience, right? Things like aliens and Bigfoot and whatever. And one of the things that we often talk about when we hear these kind of wacky stories about aliens or whatever is this idea that, just because humans look like, we got 2 arms and 2 legs and we got a brain in our heads and eyes and everything else, doesn't mean that something else would be like that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the squid is sort of the perfect example of that, because like you said, they it's not hard to think that you could develop a relatively complicated language using just visual cues like that, right? Communicating through signs and symbols as opposed to communicating through sound waves. It's just such an interesting thing. I mean, do we know, like, how much do we know, I guess I'd say, today? So I guess I'll end this segment with this kind of question. What do you think in like 10 years, right? If you had to predict or hedge guess as to what you think the next big discoveries will be. Or rather, if that's too impossible, because I know it can be an impossible question, what do you think the next big areas of research are in sort of, I guess, squid biology? Like, what do you think the big pressing questions are? What are the concerns right now in the field?
So this might not be the kind of pie in the sky answer you might hope for, but climate change research is huge.
Sure.
I think it's something that we need to have a better grasp on. And based on the data that we have so far on how our oceans are changing, we've fished out not all, but a lot of the fish. And so that's leaving a huge opening in the ecosystem for cephalopods to do quite well because they're predators. We ate their predators, basically. And so they also reproduce quite quickly compared to other things in their like trophic level, like things that are eating the same stuff they are. And so I think we'll be looking to see like where squid are moving to, whether they're doing as well as they currently are reproduction wise, whether, for example, like the increase in acidity in the ocean or the decrease in the pH of the ocean is going to affect their eggs or anything about their bodies internally, how the heat of the ocean may affect the ability for them to do well, and whether we should be eating more squid as a food source for protein for all the humans that we're going to have to feed. I think that's going to be super, super important.
Interesting. Okay. So really it's these, I mean, I kind of figured that would be a big challenge, right? I mean, obviously you can imagine, so for listeners that don't understand, I guess, or don't really realize this, so CO2, carbon dioxide, is acidic. And so especially when it dissolves in water, right? It dissolves in water, it becomes basically a source of, it becomes an acidic source essentially. So that's why an increase in climate change increases the acidity of water. That's one way that can actually happen. Do we know, or do we have an idea that squid are affected? Like, do we have any sense that they are negatively affected by this? Or is it more of a, like you're saying, because of the kind of damage we've done to the ecology around the squid, that they're actually just doing better? And maybe we're in this weird situation where, you know, similar listeners to when we talked about Rachel Carson, we did predator-prey relations, something similar here. We've kind of hurt the things that are hunting the squid, so now the squid population is getting high, and they're now potentially over abundantly eating things.
Clearly, they're survivors.
Right? Yeah.
They're like, fine, bring it.
Right. So, like, there has been some evidence that their eggs may not do quite as well, but overall, their eggs did pretty much okay in higher temperature, higher or lower pH. But it's really tough to say. Like, we may be in this like squid sweet spot of like killing all their competition, but not increasing the temperature and increasing the acidity to the extent like to be past the point of no return for them.
Right.
Some cephalopods we can say like for sure are going to have a harder time with a more acidic ocean, and that would be the cuttlefish and any other cephalopod that has an internalized shell. So there's like a squid called the ram's horn squid, and they have this like internal spiral shaped shell. And so generally speaking, if your ocean is acidic, you have a harder time making things, making shells. And so the cuttle bone that keeps the buoyancy of the cuttlefish and also gives it its characteristic rugby ball shape is going to be harder to make. And so what the implications of that are going to be for the cuttlefish population can't be great. We don't know yet. But the squid that don't, and the octopuses that don't have a super hard shell, maybe we'll be fine. TBD.
Wild. All right. Well, with that, we're going to take our first break, and we'll be back in one moment.
And we're back.
Yes, we are back with Dr. Sarah McAnulty from the University of Connecticut Molecular and Cellular Biology Department. as well as from Skype a Scientist. So, Sarah, I guess actually is kind of a wrap-up question from the previous discussion here where we're talking about your work with squids and everything else. What are ways that people can, like, are squids in danger? Are they endangered? Are there conservation efforts that need to be done? Is there a way for listeners to help with that? And is there a way, frankly, for listeners to just learn more about squid biology on their own?
Yeah, so squid on the whole, doing pretty good. We hope we keep doing good. So what you want to do to help squid is really anything you can do to help the ocean. Like everything from doing a beach cleanup locally to trying to reduce your plastic consumption, and anything that you can do that will decrease your carbon footprint, which I realize is very challenging to do, is worth doing. Voting for people who are going to push forward climate action, very, very important. So those are the real things that you can do. Overall, there aren't squid. If there are endangered squid, we don't really know they're endangered because they live deep, we think. Because the squid that we have that are shallow are doing overall pretty great. And it's entirely possible that we're doing a total number on deep sea squid, but we don't know about it because we don't have enough data about them. There are a couple things I would recommend if you want to learn more about cephalopods or squid. There's a book called Squid Empire by Donna Stoff, and she is like amazing. She wrote a book all about cephalopod evolution. And like generally speaking, I didn't think I would be interested in extinct cephalopods, but she's such a good writer and she tells such a good story that's a great book. There's also a slightly more academic book called Cephalopod Behavior by Roger Hanlon and John Messenger, and that will go into all the nitty gritty things about cephalopods and why they do what they do, and it's a really thorough book. And if you're going to look at that, get the second edition because it has a lot more information. It was updated like 2 years ago, and the new edition is phenomenal. And there's also a book called Kraken by Wendy Williams that you can read too. That's all about squid biologists.
Awesome. Really cool.
Cool.
Yeah, very cool. All right, so we are going to now transition to kind of what you're working on now, which is Skype a Scientist. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that project?
Sure. Yeah. So Skype a Scientist is a platform that helps connect scientists to non-scientists in a lot of different ways. So our flagship program matches scientists with classrooms, library groups, scout troops, basically anybody who wants to talk to a scientist online using video chat. And so we serve about 10,000 classrooms a year. Classrooms and other groups, but it's mostly classrooms. And basically the group leader, whoever they are that want to talk to a scientist, will tell us the type of scientist they want to talk to. There are about 30 categories that people can choose from. They can also get super specific. Let's say they want to talk to somebody who knows about colony collapse disorder in bees. They want a bee expert. They can go on our website and use our scientist search tool, type in the word bee, and then everybody who studies bees will pop up. And then you can request that scientist by name. We match by like boring things like time zone and time availability and that kind of thing. And also, if your group is over half of a given underrepresented group in STEM, you can tell us that, and then we'll try to match you with a scientist from the same group. You can also request a female scientist, and you can also request an LGBTQ scientist, or a scientist that grew up in a low-income upbringing, because that's really important to a lot of kids that want to see someone like them having made it to science. We also do events at like bars and community centers and festivals. They're pretty play-based, mostly for adults. They're just like science games that you might want to play with a beer in your hand, or no beer if beer's not your thing. And we do some other online things for adults as well. And we're building training for our scientists to get better at science communication, because scientists on the whole are pretty busy people. And so we want to make them feel empowered to do science communication all the time and feel confident in their skills and overall just do it more than we've been doing it in the past and do it effectively.
It's such a first off, it's such a good idea. You know, I mean, even like in my own life, I was thinking back to this the other day before, you know, we were kind of planning to have you on and everything. I don't think I could name, like, I got lucky because of where I grew up. I grew up in New York City. And so I was really fortunate to go to a high school where my chemistry teacher and my biology teacher were both scientists before they came to teach at this high school. And it's just kind of is like luck of the draw. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You know, other teachers I had or other friends I had that went to other schools had, you know, chemistry teachers who were English majors or, you know, people that just like got into teaching to teach, right? They weren't doing kind of research. You know, if it wasn't for those kind of interactions, I don't think I would have met a scientist until maybe ever really. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's wild to think how differently my life would have gone had I never had those interactions. And so, you know, it's one of those funny things where, you know, the scientific community is kind of scratching their heads right now and wondering, you know, well, why is it that the public doesn't really trust science and maybe academics and whatever? And, you know, I think the kind of first question you got to ask is, well, have you ever talked to a member of the public about what you do?
Yeah, exactly. You know? And like how many people who aren't scientists have actually met a scientist?
Yeah, like how many people can honestly say that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I was growing up, I had never really met a scientist. Like, we didn't know any. And so my parents, they knew I liked squid. So they were like, I don't know, like maybe you'll work in an aquarium, maybe you'll be a dolphin trainer. And I was like, okay.
Dolphin trainer, like dolphins, sure those punks? No.
I know. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's not it. But like, I have no idea what being a squid person is. Like, what's a squid job? Like, I'm sure I'll figure it out. But I had no idea. And so I didn't really learn what science looked like until I got to college. And I'm lucky I got a view into that as early as I did once I got to college. Like, that doesn't happen for everybody. And so, yeah, we just got to talk to people. That's step one.
Yeah, it's a super cool program. It's funny, actually.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, I'm gonna sign up right after this. I'm really excited.
Great.
It's gonna be great. So one of the things I guess, or one of the topics of it that I think is really important too, is the ability for people to reach out to scientists and reach out through this program. You know, we have a lot of listeners who are teachers or who are just people who have kids that are interested in this stuff that, you know, they're interested in it. Their kids have grown interested in it. And so they want to get them excited about these topics and things. And what we find a lot of the time, honestly, is, and this is something I was thinking about a lot the other day, you know, kind of why is it that people transition from, say, like thinking or enjoying like physics or chemistry or biology or these other sciences to then getting involved or interested in more kind of like fringy science, pseudoscience stuff, right? And
right,
honestly,
yeah.
part of the reasons why I think it happens, besides the fact that frankly that stuff can be exciting and interesting and fun and all that other stuff, right? I mean, I watch those documentaries too sometimes, you know?
Yeah.
But I think really the difference is, or the thing that we hear really commonly from people is, you know, you go to these conventions or something and you say, well, why are you into this stuff? And they'll tell me, you know, well, I really liked science as a kid, but I wasn't smart enough to be a scientist.
Yeah.
That's such a disheartening answer for me to hear, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I squeaked by on chemistry and math.
Yes.
And
same.
Then, like, pure perseverance and force of will, I was like, you know what? I don't care that I got a C in calculus and chemistry. Like, I'm going to be a squid scientist. Like, who's going to stop me? You know?
I got a C in organic chemistry and then did my PhD on organometallic chemistry. You know what I mean? It has no relation. Yeah. No relation at all. Like at a certain level, it becomes more about, like you said, drive and just interest, right? Like love of the subject. is almost what's more important than kind of your grades and things. And I really do think that if we could tell more kids that and get more kids to believe that they could do this, that hopefully it will, I don't know, in some small way turn the tide a little bit here, you know?
Yeah. And decrease the intimidation around science, because a lot of people think that scientists are ultra geniuses. And while there are smart people in science, I'm not a genius. I just really like squid. And,
I think that's the perfect way of saying it, though. Yeah. It's like, I think that you have a passion about something and you've translated it. You could have translated it, your love of squid into a number of different things. Like you could have worked in an aquarium, but I think it's like having kids be able to experience that. Like, hey, do you love bugs? Like my daughter loves slugs. She loves them. And it's sort of like, again, to hear kind of like somebody talk about, that what you could do with that and like kind of nurture that, I think is like a good place to kind of get the, the germination for what you could do in sciences.
Yeah.
Because it does seem kind of like a distance, like you were saying, between like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I know I'm going to do something. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I think that's such a good bridge.
Yeah.
So what do you think the next steps are here for, because, you're also very involved, obviously, through Skype as Scientists, but also through Twitter and through sort of coming on shows like this and everything. You're really involved in science communication. Mm-hmm. It's funny, actually, you mentioned, Woods Hole and then being from, or kind of, being in Pennsylvania and stuff in Philly. We did a whole series on Rachel Carson not that long ago. And one of the things that really stuck out to me was the fact that she became interested or involved in the sciences as a kid, not because of school or not because of these other things, but because there were ways for her to engage with science at home that her and her mother could do, right? And so you had those, during the 30s and 40s and 50s, you had sort of ornithology clubs all over the place, and you had ecology, before it was ecology, but you had ecology basically happening in people's backyards and on their nature hikes, and doing that kind of stuff. In biology, sort of, I guess, in kind of animal biology, do opportunities like that exist for people? Like if a kid wanted to get involved in, I don't know, working with an aquarium or just studying this stuff at home or learning more about it and everything else, what would you say are some opportunities for them? Or are there people you think, listeners, if they have a kid who loves this stuff, who's really interested, do you think there are people that you can recommend who you would say, well, they should check this out, or they should listen to these people, or, I don't know, YouTube channels, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think knowledge and access to information is more democratized now than it's ever been in human history. And so you can learn so much from just going on the internet and looking stuff up. There are a lot of YouTube channels that are specialized in the various things that you're into. So like everything from neuroscience to bugs to big cats to everything. So like, for example, I'm going to Costa Rica unless the coronavirus thwarts my plans at the end of April. I want to see some bugs while I'm there. And I don't know the first thing about bugs, really. Like, I know the same amount of bugs that any given scientist does, but not much more than that. And so I've been like going on YouTube and just like looking up bug videos and watching bug scientists or insect scientists, entomologists, that have made their own videos and learning from them, because there are so many science communicators out there just doing their thing, often to pretty small audiences. So you can find those folks on the internet. And then Twitter is another great place to get a sense for who scientists are and what they do and what they're into. And then also just like go to a nature reserve, go to a park near you. I spent a lot of my childhood in like a glorified drainage ditch, honestly, but like it felt like nature.
That's great.
I grew up in Philadelphia, and my dad would take me down to this like sad little creek. And I know it's a sad little creek now, but I thought it was like the height of nature. I like couldn't believe all the amazing animals that I was seeing.
That's awesome.
Down at the creek, like the minnows and the bugs and whatever. And so just like get out there, like flip some logs, see what you have around you. If you're interested in animals, particularly local to you, check out iNaturalist. There's a lot you can learn about your local wildlife just from observations that other people in your area have had. There's an inexhaustible number of things. If you're in college, there's tons of things you can do internship wise, and make sure that you find the ones that will actually pay you. REUs are really, really good. They're funded, I believe, by the government. I'm sorry, my cat is like screaming. Can you hear him?
It's all good.
Your cat is like, feed me squid.
Yeah, talking about fish. We're talking about seafood in there.
He's just dramatic.
It's all good.
He needs attention 100% of the time, and I have not talked to him in 51 minutes and 54 seconds, and he's really upset about that. Anyway, is he done? I think he's done. Okay. But yeah, there's a bunch of ways that you can like just find your thing and find your people online, and just learn stuff as you go in your local environment.
Awesome.
And local museums, of course, are great.
You know, I gotta tell you, I was on the plane home yesterday. So in my day job, I travel a lot. I was on the way home, and I was feeling really, I'm not gonna lie, I was feeling pretty down about kind of the state of science communication in terms of just, you know, kind of some of the stuff that we do. And talking to you here today has given me a new lease on this stuff. It's so energizing to talk to you and hear you talk about this stuff. And it's so cool. There's so many opportunities for kids and everyone to get into this stuff. Listeners, please follow at Skype Scientist. Follow Dr. McAnulty here. What's your Twitter handle here? It's at Sarah McAttack.
Sarah McAttack. I'm Sarah McAttack on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. You can find Skype a Scientist at Skype a Scientist on Instagram, and Skype Scientist on Twitter, because Skype a Scientist was taken on Twitter. And our website is skypeascientist.com. We are always in need of donations, small to large. Any size is great, because we are basically a startup nonprofit, and want to make sure that everyone's getting paid for their work. And we're like the starving artist equivalent of science communicators at the moment. So patreon.com/SkypeAScientist. And you can give us a one-time donation at paypal.com/SkypeAScientist. And we're a 501c3 nonprofit, so any donations that you give us are tax deductible.
Very cool.
Well, so cool.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Marie, any last questions or things?
No. Oh, here. Okay, so one more prediction.
Okay.
Do you think we'll get more footage of giant squid in the next year?
Oh, for sure.
So. Sure.
I mean, we're putting more ROVs down there than before. We've got better cameras that go underwater better. Like, just give it time, we're going to see more giant squid.
And they're becoming more they're more influencers now, right?
If there's any ocean animal that's an influencer, other than maybe whales, giant squid. Come on.
Love it.
Gotta be. Well, great stuff. Thanks so much for coming on, and we will, listeners, we'll be back again soon with another episode. Thank you again, dear listeners, for listening to the Mad Scientist podcast. I have been your host, Chris Cogswell, joined by my co-host,
Marie Mayhew.
If you'd like to contact the show, please send us an email at themadscientistpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word. You can also follow us on Twitter at Mad Scientist Pod or at Team Giant Squid for Marie. And of course, you can see us on Facebook, on Instagram, and all over the internet as the Mad Scientist Podcast. And again, our logo is the one with the pumpkin head, so it's easy to see.
Mm-hmm.
If you've enjoyed the show tonight, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where the money that you give to us will help us to promote this show further, to make it better, and just to spend more time making it.
Because we love doing that.
We do love doing that. Our logo was designed by Carrie Shaheen. Our web design is done by Desdemona Howard.
Woohoo!
And our sound design is done by Jake Cardinal.